There exists a kind of discipline that does not collapse under pressure. It doesn't weaken when the body is tired. It doesn't negotiate when motivation disappears, and it does not rely on inspiration, reminders, or self-belief. It simply functions. Centuries ago, in feudal Japan, there were individuals who embodied this kind of discipline so completely that people believed they were not human. They crossed mountains alone. They survived without supplies. They trained in silence for years without recognition. They acted with precision while others froze. They were not driven by willpower. They were shaped by systems. The people we now call Shinobi did not rely on motivation because they understood something fundamental about the human mind. Motivation is unreliable. Emotion is unstable. Intention is fragile. Survival demanded something stronger. During the Sengoku period, a time of constant war and political chaos, regions like Iga and Koga became known not for armies, but for individuals trained to operate independently. These were not heroic warriors charging into battle. They were specialists in endurance, invisibility, patience, and restraint. Their discipline was quiet, and it was terrifyingly consistent. One of the most misunderstood ideas about the Shinobi is that they were born exceptional. In reality, many were selected precisely because they were ordinary. No noble blood, no legendary strength, no special talent. What mattered was whether the individual could be reconstructed. In the historical records of Iga, there are references to boys sent away not because they were gifted, but because they were unreliable, inconsistent, undisciplined, unable to keep their word. This was not a disqualification. It was raw material. One such boy was named Akio. Akio grew up in a farming village on the outskirts of the mountains. His days followed a predictable rhythm: field work at dawn, errands by midday, exhaustion by evening. On the surface, he was no different from any other boy. But inside, Akio was fractured. Every morning, he told himself he would work harder. Every afternoon, he slowed down. Every night, he promised tomorrow would be different. His body responded to discomfort instantly. Hunger distracted him. Fatigue defeated him. Boredom pulled him away from effort. The villagers noticed. He starts strong, they said, but he never finishes. Akio heard these words often enough that they began to define him. He stopped arguing. He simply accepted them. At night, he would watch the mountains. Sometimes he saw movement, sometimes he imagined it, but the idea that someone could live up there, alone, disciplined, unseen, felt impossible and magnetic at the same time. Shinobi were not talked about openly, but everyone knew the rumors. Children were warned with their names. Adults spoke of them only in half sentences. Akio wanted to believe he could become one. But belief was not enough. One autumn evening, while returning from the forest with an unfinished bundle of firewood, Akio encountered an old traveler sitting beside the path. The man looked unremarkable. Simple clothing, no weapon visible, no insignia, but his posture was unsettlingly calm. "You stop when it becomes uncomfortable," the man said without looking up. Akio froze. "I didn't." "You did. Every time." There was no accusation in his voice, only certainty. Akio felt exposed in a way he couldn't explain. The man stood and adjusted the strap of his pack. "You want discipline, but you are trying to build it on emotion. Emotion collapses." Akio didn't know what to say. The man continued walking. "If you want to understand how discipline actually works, follow me." They walked toward the mountains. Akio followed for 10 minutes before his legs began to burn. At 30 minutes, his breathing became shallow. At an hour, his mind began screaming for him to stop. This was familiar. The excuses came quickly. "You'll try again tomorrow." "This is pointless. You're not meant for this." The man did not slow down. Akio fell behind, then caught up, then fell behind again. At some point, the pain stopped being the problem. The problem became the choice. Stopping would end the suffering immediately. Continuing meant unknown duration. And in that moment, Akio realized something terrifying. Every time he had failed before, it was not because he was incapable, it was because stopping had always been an option. As long as stopping existed, discipline was optional. Hours later, long after darkness fell, Akio collapsed near the ridge. His body shook uncontrollably. His hands were numb. The man turned. "You have completed your first lesson," he said. "Not because you are strong, because you removed the option to quit." Akio didn't respond. He couldn't. When he woke, he was inside a simple structure built from wood and stone. The air smelled of smoke and pine. There were no decorations, no comforts. Only silence. "You are not here to become motivated," the man said. "You are here to be reshaped." This was a foundation of Shinobi discipline. Not force, not inspiration, elimination. They did not ask how to stay consistent. They asked how to remove inconsistency. And the first thing they removed was choice. Akio did not know how many days passed after he arrived in the mountains. Time was not announced. There were no explanations, no welcoming speeches, no comfort given to ease to shock. That too was intentional. The first thing the Shinobi removed was the illusion of control over time. Akio learned this the hard way. Before dawn on what he assumed was the second day, a sharp wooden clapper struck once in the darkness. The sound was dry, final, and impossible to ignore. Akio's body reacted before his thoughts did. He stood up in confusion, heart racing, unsure of where he was or what was expected. Around him, others were already standing. There were no commands, no instructions. Everyone simply moved. This unsettled him more than shouting ever could have. In his village, work began with discussion. Someone decided when to start, someone complained, someone negotiated. Here, none of that existed. The sound occurred, action followed. That was all. Later, Akio learned that the Shinobi deliberately avoided verbal orders whenever possible. Orders created dependency. Signals created autonomy. A trained individual did not need to be told what to do. They recognized the moment and responded. That morning, Akio followed the others outside into the cold. The mountain air cut through his thin clothing. His body screamed for warmth. His mind searched for excuses. This is unsafe. This is pointless. This is too extreme. But no one reacted. They began moving through a sequence of motions that Akio did not recognize. Slow, deliberate movements. Not aggressive, not impressive, almost boring to watch. His instinct was to rush, to compensate, to prove something. He failed immediately. His breathing became erratic, his balance collapsed, his legs trembled. One of the older students approached him silently and adjusted his stance with a single touch. No words, just correction. Akio felt something unfamiliar rise in him. Shame. Not the dramatic shame of being insulted, a quieter shame, the kind that comes from realizing you are unprepared and exposed. The training continued. After what felt like hours, the group dispersed without acknowledgement. No praise, no dismissal. The clapper sounded again later, signaling food. Food was simple, small portions, no conversation. Akio waited for someone to explain the rules. No one did. That night, exhaustion swallowed him. But his sleep was shallow. His body ached. His mind replayed every failure of the day. When the clapper sounded again before dawn, his first conscious thought was refusal. Not anger, not fear, refusal. Just one more hour. I can recover better if I rest. They won't notice. But as soon as the thought appeared, Akio noticed something else. There was no internal debate. The thought came and passed. His body stood. That disturbed him. Back home, every decision came with argument, even small ones. Get up now or later. Try again or quit. Effort always felt heavy because it required persuasion. Here, persuasion was absent. He didn't feel motivated. He simply moved. Days passed like this. The clapper, movement, training, silence, food, sleep. At some point, Akio realized something critical. No one was watching him. No one checked attendance. No one punished mistakes. No one rewarded effort. And yet, no one skipped training. This contradicted everything he believed about discipline. In his old life, effort only happened when there was pressure, when someone was watching, when consequences were visible. Remove those, and effort disappeared. But here, effort continued without supervision. Akio eventually asked one of the instructors why. The man considered him for a moment before answering. Because discipline enforced externally collapses the moment the external force disappears. That sentence stayed with Akio. The shinobi did not build discipline on rules. They built it on identity. On the seventh day, Akio was summoned to the inner hall. The space was plain. Wooden floor, low ceiling, a single lantern. The man who had brought him to the mountain stood waiting. "You will speak," the man said, "and you will listen." Akio nodded. "You came here believing discipline was about effort," the man continued. "Effort is unreliable. Pain tolerance is unreliable. Motivation is a lie." Akio felt exposed again. "In Nimbo," the man said, "we remove the conditions that allow weakness to survive." He placed a small wooden tablet on the floor. "You will declare who you are, not what you want, not what you will try, who you are." Akio hesitated. In his village, words were cheap, promises were flexible, identity shifted depending on circumstances. This felt different. "What if I fail?" Akio asked. The man's expression did not change. "Then the person you declared never existed." Akio swallowed. "I am a student of Nimpo," he said slowly. "My word is my bond. If I break it, I break myself." The words felt heavy, uncomfortable. But something strange happened as he spoke them. The familiar escape routes vanished. There was no trying left, only being or not being. The instructor nodded once. From that moment, Akio noticed a shift in his mind. When fatigue appeared, it was just fatigue. When doubt appeared, it was just a sensation. None of it carried authority anymore, because authority had moved elsewhere, to the identity he had declared. Modern neuroscience would eventually explain this as identity-based behavior. When actions align with self-concept, resistance decreases dramatically. But the shinobi had discovered this through observations centuries earlier. If you identify as someone who trains, training requires no negotiation. If you identify as someone who endures, endurance becomes natural. Akio still struggled. His body still hurt. His mind still wandered. But the internal argument, the exhausting debate, was gone. And that changed everything. He was no longer fighting himself. He was simply acting according to what he was. This was the second thing the shinobi removed, the need to convince yourself. And once that disappeared, discipline no longer felt heroic, it felt inevitable. Once Akio declared who he was, the training changed in a subtle but decisive way, not in intensity, not in duration, but in structure. Until then, he believed discipline was about forcing yourself to do hard things. What the shinobi showed him next was far more unsettling. Discipline collapses when choice exists. The instructors never spoke about flexibility. They spoke about rhythm. In the mountains, rhythm governed everything. Not mood, not energy, not inspiration. The same clapper sounded every morning at the same moment. The same sequence followed. The same silence. The same pace. At first, Akio thought this was rigidity. Then he realized it was mercy. Back in the village, every day was different. Tasks shifted, schedules bent, excuses multiplied. His mind was constantly negotiating. When to start, how much effort to give, whether to delay. Here, negotiation was impossible. Time was fixed. The instructors explained it without philosophy. When time changes, one of them said, the mind argues. When time is fixed, the body obeys. Akio tested this truth in himself. During the first week, his body resisted violently. He woke up stiff, sore, foggy. His mind threw the same thoughts it always had. You need more rest. You're pushing too hard. This isn't sustainable. But something strange began to happen. By the 10th day, he woke moments before the clapper sounded. By the 15th, his eyes opened without effort. By the 20th, he was standing before awareness fully arrived. His body had learned the rhythm. The instructors were unsurprised. The body learned patterns faster than the mind, they said. That is why we train the body first. Modern science would later confirm this. Circadian rhythms adapt rapidly when exposed to fixed schedules. Predictability reduces cortisol. Decision fatigue decreases. Resistance weakens. The Shinobi didn't need science to know this. They watched it happen. But as Akio's body adapted, his mind found a new place to attack. If he could not argue about when, he began arguing about how. Some mornings he wanted to train harder. Some mornings he wanted to conserve energy. Some days he felt inspired, others hollow. He began subtly adjusting movements, changing intensity, rearranging sequences. He told himself he was being intelligent. The instructor saw it immediately. "You are still negotiating," one of them said. "You have just changed the battlefield." They introduced the next rule without discussion. For the next 90 days, Akio would perform the exact same sequence, same movements, same order, same repetitions, same pace. No variation, no optimization, no creativity. Akio felt a surge of resistance. "Won't this limit growth?" he asked. The answer was immediate. Growth without structure is chaos. The Shinobi valued form above feeling, kata above impulse. Form was not about aesthetics, it was about elimination. Every time you vary a practice, the mind decides. Every decision creates an opening. Every opening invites weakness. At first, the repetition felt unbearable. The movements became predictable, boring, empty. His mind screamed for novelty. "This is pointless. You already know this. You're wasting time." He recognized the voice. It was the same voice that had ended every attempt he'd ever made. This time, there was no response. The sequence continued. Days blurred together. Weeks passed. By the 4th week, something unexpected happened. The voice weakened, not because Akio fought it, because it wasn't being rewarded anymore. No matter how loudly it complained, the answer was always the same movement, the same breath, the same action. Eventually, the voice stopped speaking, and in that silence, Akio noticed details he had never perceived before. The angle of his wrist, the subtle shift of weight in his feet, the timing of breath and movement. When the mind stopped demanding change, awareness deepened. This was a purpose of form, not control, freedom. The instructors explained it simply. When form becomes automatic, attention becomes available. Modern neuroscience would later describe this as the transfer of behavior to the basal ganglia, automation freeing the prefrontal cortex. The Shinobi described it as the mind stepping aside. Around the 50th day, Akio became ill. Fever, weakness, dizziness. His old logic returned instantly. Rest today. Resume when healthy. Skipping once won't matter. He brought this to an instructor. The man listened, then shook his head. "He doesn't hesitate anymore," one student whispered. Akio wasn't trying to be strong. He had simply removed every mechanism that allowed weakness to negotiate. This was the third thing the Shinobi removed: variation. Once variation died, consistency became inevitable. And once consistency became inevitable, identity solidified. In the next part, you'll see how the Shinobi prepared for the one thing that breaks every system, the unexpected, and why predecision mattered more than strength or endurance ever could. Up to this point, Akio believed he had finally understood discipline. His body obeyed rhythm. His mind no longer argued about form. His identity had stabilized. But the shinobi understood something Akio did not yet see. Perfect conditions are an illusion. No system survives reality unless it is designed for disruption. The instructors waited until Akio was comfortable before revealing the next principle. Not because they were cruel, but because comfort is where systems collapse. One morning, instead of the familiar sequence, the clapper sounded twice. Akio froze. 2 strikes had no meaning in the existing rhythm. There was no rule for it. Around him, the other students hesitated for the first time since he had arrived. Then the instructors moved. They gathered the students in the open yard and spoke plainly. "You have learned to function when life is predictable," one of them said. "Now you must learn to function when it is not." The shinobi had a name for this principle, though they rarely spoke it aloud. It was the practice of pre-decision. In warfare, hesitation kills not because it wastes time, but because it fractures attention. When the mind scrambles for options, the body stalls. The shinobi eliminated this by deciding before events occurred. They did not wait for problems. They prepared answers in advance. Akio was ordered to sit with ink and paper. "You will list every reason you have ever failed," the instructor said. Akio hesitated, then began writing. Illness, travel, fatigue, lack of time, emotional stress, unexpected work, family obligation, bad weather. The list grew longer than he expected. "These are not excuses," the instructor said. "They are patterns." The shinobi treated failure analytically, not as a moral weakness, but as a predictable response to specific conditions. "For each obstacle," the instructor continued, "you will decide your response now, not later." Akio wrote again. Illness, reduced form, never zero. Travel, shortened sequence at dawn. Fatigue, minimal execution. Weather, alternative location. Injury, train what remains. The instructor nodded. "When X happens, you do Y. No thinking, no debate." This removed the final battlefield, choice under pressure. Modern psychology would later describe this as implementation intentions, pre-programmed behavioral responses that bypass decision-making during stress. The shinobi understood it instinctively. They had seen too many warriors freeze not from fear, but from indecision. The following weeks tested this principle mercilessly. Akio was sent down the mountain unexpectedly to assist a nearby village after a landslide. The work was brutal. Long hours, little sleep, emotional strain. The old Akio would have abandoned training immediately. This time, he woke before dawn and completed a reduced sequence behind the storage shed. Not because he felt strong, because the decision had already been made weeks ago. No drama, no pride, no resistance. He simply executed. Another student twisted his ankle during training. He assumed he would be excused. The instructor corrected him. "Your leg is injured," he said. "Your breath is not." The student trained breath work and upper body form until the ankle healed. Momentum never broke. This principle separated those who transformed from those who merely improved. Improvement depends on favorable conditions. Transformation survives chaos. By the 90th day, Akio noticed something unsettling again. He no longer felt disciplined. Discipline implied effort. What he felt instead was inevitability. Training occurred whether he liked it or not. The system did not care about his preferences. This was the fourth thing the shinobi removed, the need to feel aligned. Alignment was replaced with execution. The instructors gathered the students one evening and spoke without ceremony. "Most people fail not because they are weak," one said. "They fail because they wait to decide until the moment arrives." Akio understood this deeply now. Every time he had failed in the past, it was not the obstacle that defeated him. It was the delay, the moment of internal bargaining. Now that moment no longer existed. The answer was already written. On the 100th day, the clapper did not sound. The students woke anyway. No one spoke. They completed the sequence in silence. Afterward, the head instructor addressed them.
"Your training period is over," he said. "What happens now will reveal whether discipline lives inside you or incites structure." Akio felt no relief, no excitement, only calm. He did not wonder if he would continue training. The question no longer made sense. Later that season, Akio was sent alone into the lower forest for an extended period. No instructions, no timeline, no supervision. This was not a test of skill. It was a test of identity. Days passed. He trained in rain. He trained when hungry.
He trained when tired. Not perfectly, but continuously. And in that continuity, something finally died. The part of him that negotiated, the part that waited for permission, the part that asked if it was worth it. What remained was something quiet and frightening, a person who acted without hesitation. This was why Shinobi appeared relentless, not because they pushed harder, because nothing inside them resisted action anymore. In the next part, you'll see what happens when this discipline fully integrates, when identity and action merge, and why people begin to fear those who reach this stage. Time stopped feeling like something Akio moved through. Days no longer stacked themselves in memory as separate units. There was no yesterday and no tomorrow in the way there once had been. There was only sequence: wake, breathe, move, observe, execute, rest, repeat. This was not exhaustion. This was integration. The instructors noticed it before Akio did. They always did. The Shinobi never waited for students to explain themselves. Behavior revealed truth more accurately than words ever could. One night, as rain pressed heavily against the wooden roofs, the eldest instructor sat across from Akio without warning. No summons, no ritual. "Do you know what disappears first when discipline becomes real?" the man asked. Akio did not answer immediately. He had learned that speed was rarely wisdom. "The desire to be seen," Akio said finally. The instructor nodded.
"Yes, and after that?" Akio searched his body for the answer rather than his mind. "The fear of losing progress," he said. Again, approval. The Shinobi believed that fear of regression was the final chain. As long as someone trained to protect what they had built, they were still bound to outcome. True discipline did not protect, it persisted. This was where most systems failed. Modern routines depended on streaks, rewards, visible progress. Break the streak and identity collapses. Miss a day and shame floods in. Shame then breeds avoidance. The Shinobi designed their path to destroy this weakness entirely. The next phase of Akio's training was intentionally destabilizing. The instructors removed markers, no counts, no durations, no milestones. Akio was not told how long he would train each day. He was not told when rest would occur. He was not told when the phase would end. The only instruction was simple: respond fully to what is in front of you. This was not randomness. It was exposure to uncertainty without collapse. Historians often misunderstand Shinobi training as rigid. In truth, it alternated between extreme structure and controlled chaos. This oscillation prevented dependence on either. Too much structure breeds fragility. Too much chaos breeds inconsistency. The Shinobi walked the line.
Akio felt discomfort return. Not physical, but existential. Without fixed markers, there was nothing to lean on. No way to measure success. At first, his mind searched for old anchors. How long has it been? Am I improving? Is this enough? None of those questions had answers, and slowly they stopped arising. The instructors watched closely. Many students cracked here. Some grew anxious. Some tried to recreate structure privately. Some demanded clarity. Those students did not last. Akio did not demand. He adapted. He trained when training appeared. He rested when rest appeared. He did not seek reassurance. This was the birth of trust in process. Not blind faith, but embodied confidence that action would occur regardless of uncertainty.
Neuroscience would later explain this as a shift from prefrontal dominance to basal ganglia regulation. When behavior is fully encoded, the need for conscious monitoring dissolves. The Shinobi simply called it freedom. Weeks later, Akio was given his first solitary assignment. Not a mission, a displacement. He was sent to a distant village under false identity. No weapons, no uniform, no recognition. "You are not a shinobi there," the instructor said. "You are a man who lives." This was more difficult than combat. Combat had rules. Life did not. Akio worked with fishermen. He helped repair roofs. He carried water. He slept poorly. He ate inconsistently. And yet, every morning before dawn, he trained quietly behind the storehouse. Not because he feared punishment. Not because he tracked days. Because his body expected it. Discipline had moved from mind to nervous system. The villagers noticed something unsettling. Akio never rushed. He never complained. He never skipped what needed doing. When storms came, he worked. When conflict arose, he remained calm. When exhaustion hit, he adjusted but continued. They did not call him impressive. They called him strange. This reaction was documented often in historical accounts. Those who embodied discipline without display unsettled others, not through dominance, but through contrast. They exposed the hidden negotiations others lived inside. When Akio returned to the mountain, the instructors said little. Words were unnecessary. They had seen the change. That night, the eldest instructor spoke again. "You no longer train to become," he said. "You train because stopping would be unnatural." Akio understood. The final attachment had dissolved. He was no longer protecting an identity. He was expressing one. The shinobi called this stage no return, not because failure was impossible, but because returning to the old self no longer made sense. People misunderstand this. They think discipline becomes easy. It does not. It becomes inevitable. In the next part, you'll see how this inevitability reshapes decision-making under pressure and why those who reach this stage appear unbreakable, even in loss. Akio's first real failure came quietly, not in battle, not in training, not under pressure. It came in a moment that looked insignificant from the outside. He was assigned to observe a rival clan's courier route. No confrontation, no infiltration, just observation. 3 nights in the hills, tracking patterns, learning rhythms. On the second night, exhaustion crept in. Rain soaked through his clothes. His legs ached from crouching for hours. Nothing dramatic happened. No enemy appeared. No sudden threat forced alertness. And that's when it happened. His attention softened, just for a moment. He didn't fall asleep. He didn't abandon his position. He simply allowed his awareness to loosen, drifting inward, thinking instead of seeing. The courier passed. Akio realized it only after the sound was gone. The failure was complete. When he reported back, he did not hide it. Shinobi culture punished concealment more harshly than error. The instructor listened without expression. "You lost awareness," he said. "Yes." "Why?" Akio searched himself carefully. This was not a test to pass. It was an examination to survive. "I believed nothing would happen," Akio said. The instructor nodded once. "This is the most dangerous belief," he replied. "Not fear, not panic. Comfort." The shinobi feared comfort more than enemies. Fear sharpened attention. Panic could be trained. Comfort dissolved vigilance silently. That night, Akio was introduced to the concept that separated long-lived warriors from dead ones. Continuous mind. Not tension, not paranoia, continuity. The instructor explained it simply. Awareness is not something you turn on when danger appears. It is something that never turns off. Historical texts often reference this as Zen Shin, but among shinobi it went deeper. Samurai often practiced awareness at the end of action. Shinobi practiced awareness before, during, and after, without change. Akio was ordered to repeat the observation mission. Same conditions, same route, same terrain, but with one difference. He was forbidden from thinking.
No internal dialogue, no planning, no reflection, only sensory registration. At first, this seemed impossible. The human mind constantly narrates, it labels, it comments. But the instructors were ruthless. Every time Akio returned and described his thoughts instead of his observations, he was sent back. What did you see? I thought, go again. By the fourth night, something shifted. The mind grew quiet, not through force, but through irrelevance. There was nothing to think about because everything was being perceived. The texture of bark under fingers, the weight distribution in his feet, the sound of insects before movement. And then the courier passed again. This time, Akio noticed the absence before the presence, a disruption in the environment so subtle it could not be named. He followed without effort. Later, the instructor said only this: "Now you understand why discipline without awareness is useless." This was the missing piece modern systems ignore. They build habits without perception, routines without presence, discipline without consciousness. That creates brittle people. The Shinobi built adaptive ones. The next phase of training stripped away another illusion: control. Akio was placed in scenarios designed to fail. Tools broke, plans collapsed, information was incomplete. The goal was not success. The goal was response. Could he act without resentment? Could he continue without frustration? Could he adapt without self-pity? This was where most disciplined people collapse. Not when effort is required, but when effort feels unfair. The instructors watched closely. When something went wrong, did Akio complain internally? Did he tighten emotionally? Did his movements change? At first, yes. Then less. Then almost never. This was not emotional suppression. It was emotional irrelevance. The Shinobi believed emotions were signals, not commands. Feel them, register them, move anyway. A modern neuroscientist would describe this as decoupling limbic activation from behavioral inhibition. The Shinobi described it as walking while the storm passes through you. One evening, Akio was told something that permanently altered his understanding of strength. "You believe strength is the ability to endure," the instructor said. Akio nodded. "That is incorrect. Strength is the ability to remain intact." Endurance implied damage accumulation. Intactness implied correct structure. Weak systems survive by effort. Strong systems survive by design. This was why Shinobi discipline looked effortless from the outside, not because it required less energy, but because it wasted none. No arguing with reality, no resentment toward discomfort, no attachment to preference, only response. Over time, Akio noticed a strange effect. Situations that once felt stressful no longer registered as such. Not because they were easy, but because stress requires internal resistance. Without resistance, there was only task. This frightened him at first. Was something missing? The instructor answered without being asked. "You have not lost feeling," he said. "You have lost interference." Akio was finally ready for what the Shinobi considered the most dangerous phase: return. He was sent back to normal society. Markets, noise, distractions, idle conversations. Most students regressed here. They reabsorbed chaos. Akio did not. He did not isolate. He did not preach. He did not display superiority. He simply remained unchanged. He trained when it was time. He rested when it was time. He acted when action was required. Nothing more, nothing less. People noticed, not admiration, unease. Because when someone no longer negotiates internally, their presence exposes the hidden negotiations in others. And that discomfort has always been mistaken for fear.
In the final part, you'll see what happens when discipline becomes so deeply embedded that even identity dissolves, and why the shinobi believed the ultimate warrior was invisible even to himself. Akio disappeared. Not in the way people imagine disappearance. He did not vanish into legend overnight. There was no ceremony, no final trial announced to the school. He simply stopped being noticed. This was the final paradox of shinobi discipline. The stronger you became, the less visible you were meant to be. In the final stage of training, the instructors removed titles. No student, no rank, no future shinobi. Just people moving through tasks. Akio was assigned work that looked meaningless, carrying water, cleaning tools that were already clean, standing watch where nothing ever happened. This was not punishment, it was erasure. The shinobi believed that as long as a person identified as someone who trains, ego still existed. And ego, no matter how refined, created distortion. The ultimate warrior did not see himself as disciplined. He simply functioned correctly. This stage was known informally as the vanishing. Akio no longer woke up thinking about training. He woke up because the body woke. He no longer prepared mentally before tasks. The body adjusted automatically. There was no inner dialogue saying, "Be strong, be calm, stay focused." Those instructions belonged to an earlier version of him, the version that needed guidance. One evening, the eldest instructor spoke for the last time. "You are no longer training discipline," he said. "You are testing whether anything unnecessary remains." Akio understood. This was not about doing more. It was about removing the last fragments of self-reference. The final test was not physical. It was existential. Akio was ordered to abandon the mountain permanently. No return date, no role, no contact. "Go live," the instructor said. "If discipline survives there, it is real." Historical records show this pattern repeatedly. Shinobi training did not end with mastery inside the system. It ended with exposure to chaos without structure, because only what is truly integrated survives disorder. Akio entered the world again. Years passed. He worked ordinary jobs. He lived modestly. He spoke little. But his discipline never faded. Not because he protected it, because there was nothing to protect. He did not maintain habits. He responded appropriately to reality. When work demanded effort, he worked. When rest was required, he rested. When conflict arose, he addressed it directly. No drama, no avoidance, no justification. People struggled to categorize him. He was not intense, not aggressive, not motivational. He was simply immovable. Those who lived around him noticed something unsettling. He never complained. He never rushed. He never procrastinated. He also never sought praise. This absence created discomfort. Most people live inside internal bargaining. Akio did not, and that silence exposed the noise in others. Some called him extreme. Others said he lacked emotion. Both were wrong. He felt everything. He simply no longer negotiated with it. This was the final truth of the system. Discipline is not something you apply. It is something that remains when everything unnecessary is removed. Modern systems fail because they add layers, more rules, more tracking, more motivation. The shinobi did the opposite. They removed the option to delay, the option to bargain, the option to redefine commitments, the option to quit silently until only action remained. This is why their discipline survived hunger, cold, fear, isolation, and time. Not because they were superhuman, because they eliminated everything that made humans inconsistent. Akio never became famous. He never taught publicly. But decades later, fragments of his existence appeared in records. A village that survived the flood because one man organized without panic. A group of travelers saved because someone remained calm while others froze. A dispute resolved without escalation because one presence shifted the room. No name, no credit. Just effect. This was the highest expression of ninpo, not dominance, not recognition, function. The shinobi believed that when discipline becomes invisible, it has reached perfection. And this is where the lesson returns to you. You do not need secret mountains. You do not need rituals. You do not need ancient weapons. You need elimination. Eliminate negotiation. Eliminate inconsistency. Eliminate dependency on mood. Eliminate the identity that wants comfort over correctness. Discipline without mercy does not mean cruelty. It means clarity. It means doing what must be done without internal debate. It means becoming someone who no longer asks, "Should I?" because that question belongs to the person you used to be. The system still works. It always has. The question is not whether you understand it. The question is whether you are willing to let go of the version of yourself that cannot live without excuses. Because the discipline that frightens others is not loud. It is quiet. It does not announce itself. It simply remains, long after motivation disappears, long after comfort is gone, long after identity dissolves. And once it is there, it never leaves. If you have followed this entire journey, you already feel it. That subtle discomfort, that pull, that realization that the weak version of you has been exposed. Good. That is the beginning, not of discipline, but of inevitability. Akio never explained himself. That was another discipline the shinobi valued deeply, silence where explanation was unnecessary. In the years that followed his departure from the mountain, people often tried to extract meaning from him. They wanted reasons, methods, shortcuts. They wanted the technique without the transformation. Akio gave them nothing. Not out of arrogance, but because he understood something most teachers never do. Discipline cannot be transferred verbally once it has crossed a certain threshold. It must be experienced, not described. This principle appears repeatedly in historical shinobi scrolls. Instructions become intentionally vague at advanced stages, not because knowledge is withheld, but because language becomes distortion. Words create interpretation. Interpretation creates choice. Choice recreates hesitation. The shinobi system was built to eliminate hesitation, not decorate it. Akio's life demonstrated this in a way no lecture ever could. He took on work others avoided, long hours, unstable conditions, responsibility without authority. He never sought promotion, yet authority naturally formed around him. People deferred without knowing why, not because he was dominant, but because he was reliable. Reliability is rare. Most people are consistent only when conditions are kind. Akio was consistent regardless of conditions. This is where modern discipline fails most catastrophically. People believe discipline is about intensity. The shinobi knew it was about predictability. Not predictability to others, predictability to reality itself. Akio did not spike effort and crash. He did not overcommit and disappear. He did not negotiate with himself when pressure rose. Reality learned it could rely on him. And when reality relies on you, opportunities appear without being chased. This is documented historically. Shinobi were often entrusted with critical missions not because they were the strongest, but because they did not break patterns. Daimyo valued this above all else. A man who panics once is dangerous forever. Akio's discipline was invisible but absolute. Then came the test no training could simulate: loss. A fire swept through the region where Akio lived. Homes destroyed, supplies lost, people displaced. Chaos spread quickly. This is where most disciplined people collapse. When systems disappear, routines die with them. Akio did not lose discipline because discipline was not attached to environment. He adapted instantly. He organized without command. He conserved resources without hoarding. He worked without exhaustion. Observers later noted something strange. He did not rush. Urgency did not infect him. This is a critical distinction the Shinobi understood deeply. Haste is not speed. Haste wastes energy. Speed is clean. Akio moved with speed. Others burned out within days. Akio continued. This is why the Shinobi trained under deprivation, not to glorify suffering, but to remove dependency on comfort. Comfort is not evil. Dependence on it is fatal. Over time, Akio became a reference point, not a leader, but an anchor. When people felt overwhelmed, they looked toward him unconsciously. This effect appears again and again in historical accounts. Shinobi presence stabilized environments, not through fear, but through certainty. Certainty is contagious. So is chaos. Akio spread certainty. But here is the most important part, the one modern narratives avoid. Akio did not feel proud. There was no internal reward loop, no identity of the disciplined one. That identity had been dissolved long ago. This is why his discipline endured. The Shinobi warned repeatedly against identifying as disciplined. Why? Because identity creates fragility. If you are a disciplined person, then failure threatens who you are. Akio was not disciplined. He was aligned. Aligned with action. Aligned with reality. Aligned with necessity. When alignment exists, discipline is automatic. This is the core misunderstanding of modern self-improvement. People try to become disciplined. The Shinobi eliminated the self that resists discipline. Two completely different approaches. One builds tension. The other removes friction. Akio never tried to maintain habits. Maintenance implies decay. He simply acted correctly. When sleep was required, he slept. When work was required, he worked. When nothing was required, he was still. No guilt, no indulgence, no oscillation. This balance frightened people more than intensity ever could, because it revealed a truth they avoided. Most suffering comes not from hardship, but from internal conflict. Akio had no internal conflict. That is why his presence felt heavy, not aggressive, heavy, like gravity. This is why the Shinobi emphasized structure over effort. Effort is unreliable. Structure endures. Akio was structure in human form. Years later, someone finally asked him directly, "How do you never lose discipline?" Akio paused, not because he needed time to think, but because the question itself was flawed. "I don't hold on to discipline," he said. "I let go of what breaks it." That was the only answer he ever gave, and it was enough, because the truth is this: unbreakable discipline is not built, it is revealed. When excuses are removed, when negotiation is eliminated, when identity dissolves, what remains is action without resistance. The Shinobi knew this centuries ago, and now you do too. The question is not whether you are capable, you are. The question is what you are still holding on to that makes capability unnecessary. Comfort, delay, self-pity, the option to quit quietly. Discipline without mercy means none of these survive. Not because you are harsh, because reality does not negotiate. And neither should you. There is a moment that arrives after discipline becomes stable. It is not celebrated, it is not announced, and most people never reach it. It is the moment when discipline stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like weight. Not heavy in the sense of burden, but heavy in the sense of gravity. Akio felt it years after leaving the mountains. At first, discipline had been something that carried him forward. It protected him. It gave him structure when the world was chaotic. But as time passed, he noticed something unsettling. He could not escape it, even if he wanted to. If he stayed up late, his body woke early. If he delayed work, discomfort arose immediately. If he tried to indulge in excess, it felt unnatural.
This is the stage most people misinterpret. They believe discipline is freedom. It is not. Discipline is constraint, but it is a chosen constraint that replaces countless uncontrolled ones. The Shinobi were explicit about this. True discipline does not expand options, it removes them. Akio no longer had the option to betray his own standards. That option had been cut away long ago. This frightened him briefly. Had he become rigid? Had he lost flexibility? The answer came through experience, not thought. One winter, Akio was forced to change everything.
The region entered famine. Food became scarce. Work disappeared. Social structures collapsed. People migrated, stole, panicked. This is where rigid people break. They cling to routines that no longer apply. They insist on old structures in new reality. Akio did not, because his discipline was not attached to methods, it was attached to response. He adapted instantly. Meals became smaller without complaint. Work became physical without resentment. Rest became strategic, not indulgent. This revealed the final difference between forced discipline and embodied discipline. Forced discipline depends on control. Embodied discipline depends on awareness. Akio was not controlling himself. He was responding accurately. This is why the Shinobi emphasize perception over rules. Rules break under pressure. Perception adapts. Modern psychology confirms this. When behavior is driven by external enforcement, stress degrades performance. When behavior is driven by internalized values and automatic response, stress sharpens it. The Shinobi did not know neuroscience. They knew survival. Akio's discipline had reached the point where it no longer required monitoring, and this created a new danger: isolation. People stopped inviting him to complain, stopped including him in excuses, stopped bonding over weakness. Not because he judged, but because he reflected something uncomfortable. Most human connection is built around shared avoidance. Akio did not participate. This is the hidden cost no one discusses. True discipline separates you, not socially at first, internally. Your internal landscape becomes quieter. Others remain loud. That contrast grows. The Shinobi warned of this. They called it the loneliness of alignment. Not emotional loneliness, existential loneliness. Akio did not feel sad, but he felt separate. This is why Shinobi communities existed, not for secrecy, but for sanity. Only those walking the same path could understand the silence. Without that, many warriors became bitter or rigid. Akio avoided this by remembering a core teaching. Discipline is not superiority, it is responsibility. He did not correct others. He did not advise unless asked. He did not impose standards. Not obsessive. Stable under pressure. Stable under fatigue. Stable under uncertainty. Discipline without mercy does not mean cruelty toward yourself. It means zero tolerance for self-betrayal. Mercy is extended to pain, not to excuses. Pain passes. Excuses multiply. The Shinobi chose pain once and never again had to choose. If you're listening to this and feeling resistance, that's normal. Resistance is the negotiator fighting for survival. It knows what comes next, and it is afraid. Good. Fear means clarity is approaching. You do not need to overhaul your life. You need to eliminate one option. Choose one behavior. Fix the time, fix the form. Remove negotiation. Commit long enough for identity to change. He simply remained consistent. This prevented discipline from becoming arrogance, another trap. Years later, Akio encountered someone who reminded him of his past self. A young man, restless, frustrated, obsessed with improvement but unable to sustain effort. The man asked the same question everyone eventually asked. How do I build discipline like yours? Akio did not answer immediately. Instead, he asked a question. What do you do when you don't feel like it? The man listed strategies, motivation, rewards, pressure, accountability. Akio shook his head. That's not discipline, he said. That's persuasion. Discipline begins when persuasion is unnecessary. The man looked confused. Akio continued. You are trying to convince yourself to act. That means part of you is still allowed to refuse. The shinobi eliminated that part, not violently, systematically. The man asked how. Akio gave him one instruction. Choose one thing. Fix the time, fix the form, remove the option to skip. Nothing more. No philosophy, no inspiration, because complexity is another form of avoidance. Akio never saw the man again, but he knew the outcome. Either the system would work or the man would abandon it. There was no middle. This is the final truth modern culture avoids. Unbreakable discipline does not tolerate partial commitment, not because it is cruel, but because partial commitment preserves negotiation, and negotiation is the root of collapse. The shinobi did not build discipline through heroism, they built it through inevitability. Akio's life was proof. He was not intense, he was not dramatic, he was not obsessed, he was inevitable. And that is what frightened people most, because inevitability exposes choice. If someone can act without excuses, then excuses are revealed as optional, and most people are not ready to see that. Akio did not care, not because he was cold, but because caring is irrelevant to correctness. This is where the system ends, not in glory, not in conquest, but in quiet alignment. Discipline without mercy does not shout. It does not demand recognition. It simply continues, long after others stop. And once it reaches this stage, it no longer belongs to you. You belong to it. There is a final misunderstanding about discipline that must be destroyed. Most people think discipline is something you use, like a tool, like motivation, like a switch you turn on when life demands effort. That belief alone guarantees failure, because anything you use can be put down. The shinobi understood this better than anyone. Discipline was never a tool to them. It was a state of being. Akio reached this realization long after his training ended, long after the mountains faded into memory. One morning, years later, he woke before dawn, as always. He prepared his body, his mind, his tools. He moved with calm precision, and suddenly, a strange thought arose. What would happen if I stopped? Not out of exhaustion, not out of rebellion, just curiosity. The thought passed immediately, not because he resisted it, but because it had no traction. There was no internal debate, no emotional pull. Stopping simply wasn't the real option. And that's when he understood something crucial. Discipline is not sustained by strength. It is sustained by identity collapse. The version of him that once negotiated had ceased to exist. And you cannot return to someone who is no longer there. This is why so many people fail when they try to restart. They think discipline is something they lost. In reality, they never killed the negotiator. They only silenced him temporarily. The shinobi system was ruthless for this reason. Not because cruelty was valued, but because ambiguity was dangerous. Ambiguity leads to hesitation. Hesitation leads to death. In combat, in survival, in life. Modern neuroscience echoes this ancient truth. When behavior remains conscious and effort-based, the prefrontal cortex is constantly engaged. This region fatigues quickly under stress. But when behavior becomes automated, when identity and action align, the brain conserves energy and performs with stability. This is why people with discipline burn out, and people with embodied discipline do not. Akio was not constantly exerting effort. He was conserving it. His nervous system was calm. His decisions were few. His actions were predictable to himself. This is the final paradox. Unbreakable discipline feels boring from the outside. No drama, no struggle, no visible intensity. Just repetition, just reliability, just inevitability. And that is why most people reject it. Because boredom threatens ego. People want to feel heroic. They want transformation to feel epic. The Shinobi rejected this entirely. They trusted monotony, because monotony kills ego faster than suffering ever could. Akio did not feel special. He felt clear. And clarity is dangerous in a world addicted to noise. This clarity made one thing obvious. Most suffering is self-inflicted through unnecessary choice. What to eat, when to sleep, whether to train, whether to focus. Every choice drains energy. The Shinobi reduced choice until only execution remained. This is why their discipline survived chaos. Not because they were stronger, but because they were simpler. Akio eventually taught this to others, not as a teacher, but as an example. And he noticed the pattern. Those who asked questions wanted comfort. Those who observed silently wanted change. The system does not require belief. It requires submission, not to authority, but to structure. You do not try the system. Trying preserves escape routes. You either remove the option to quit, or you don't. This is where the path becomes uncomfortable. Because there is no partial version. You either accept the death of the negotiator, or you remain exactly where you are. The Shinobi never asked people to improve. They asked them to choose, once, and then remove choice forever. Akio knew this would not appeal to most, and that was fine. Extraordinary systems are never designed for the majority. They are designed for those who are done negotiating. So let this be clear. This path is not about becoming extreme. It is about becoming stable, not intense. Not until motivation fades, until choice disappears. That is the threshold. Most will now cross it. But if you do, you will never ask how to stay disciplined again, because the question itself will no longer exist. And when people look at you and say, that's not normal, you'll know you're finally free. Not from effort, from hesitation. And that is the only freedom discipline ever promised.